The sunlight filtered through the tall dining room windows, casting golden streaks across the long mahogany table where every polished plate and gleaming glass had been placed with precision. My mother fussed over the napkins one last time, smoothing each fold as though the very fabric of her dignity depended on them lying straight. My father sat at the head of the table, already absorbed in his glass of wine, a silent sentinel who rarely looked up unless something shattered his carefully curated silence. Cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the chairs, laughter weaving in and out of clinking silverware, their voices layered with the false ease of people pretending to enjoy each other's company. My sister Emily, radiant as ever in her tailored dress, commanded the room effortlessly with her bright anecdotes and the admiration she siphoned from every corner. I sat quietly, a spectator to the performance I had seen 100 times before, hands in my lap, heartbeat already carrying the weight of an unspoken tension I could feel rising. It was a stage play, and everyone knew their lines, everyone but me. I had barely lifted my fork when it happened. Emily stood abruptly, the scrape of her chair against the floor, silencing half the room before her words did the rest. She fixed her gaze on me, sharp, deliberate, unrelenting, and said with her voice pitched just high enough to silence the last murmur of chatter, "You are mentally ill, Madison. You don't belong at this table." Her words cut through the air, each syllable a blade that seemed to slice through the carefully constructed facade of familial harmony. For a second, I thought I had misheard her, that perhaps the ringing in my ears had twisted her words into something too cruel to be real. But the looks on the faces around me confirmed it. She had said exactly what I feared she might one day let slip, and now it was too late to take it back. The reactions came in fractured, jagged bursts, like glass cracking under sudden pressure. A few cousins let out awkward laughs that quickly died in their throats, their eyes darting to their parents for guidance. My mother froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, while my father's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. Lydia, my aunt, let out a nervous cough, as if to diffuse the moment, but the air was already thick with discomfort. The clatter of a spoon hitting a plate echoed far too loudly in the silence that followed. All around me, faces turned away or down into their food, as if avoiding my eyes would somehow erase what Emily had said. My chest constricted, the room shrinking around me, every sound magnified by the roaring in my head. I sat perfectly still, though inside my body trembled with a storm that threatened to break loose. My hands, pressed against the cool wood of the chair, felt clammy, and I could almost hear my pulse thundering against my temples. A dozen comebacks rose to my lips, shards of rage, of pain, of humiliation, but none escaped. Instead, I reached slowly for my glass, my fingers curling around its stem with a grip that betrayed the quiet fury I was holding back. The water inside shimmered, trembling with the faintest shake of my hand, but I raised it anyway, bringing it just high enough that its surface caught the light. I swallowed hard, forcing back tears, forcing back the urge to crumble. My humiliation was undeniable, but beneath it, buried in a place even Emily had never reached, was a strange calm I couldn't fully explain. Emily smirked, satisfied, her performance complete. She had delivered her line and expected me to fold the way I always had, to shrink in my chair until I disappeared, leaving her once again victorious in her role as the shining star of our family. She expected silence. She expected shame. She expected me to carry the burden of her cruelty while everyone else pretended not to see. But this time, as I looked at her, at the pride in her eyes, the superiority in her stance, I felt something shift deep inside me, something old and scarred, something that had waited years for this moment, finally stirred awake. Around me, the silence stretched unbearably, growing heavier with each second. My father cleared his throat, as if ready to intervene, but stopped himself, his hand tightening around his glass instead. My mother stared fixedly at her plate, pretending to be fascinated by her untouched peas, her denial as steady as it had always been. The cousins shifted uncomfortably, glancing between me and Emily like children watching a storm build, uncertain where the lightning would strike. And through it all, Emily kept her gaze locked on me, daring me to respond, daring me to either collapse under the weight of her words or rise against them. She thought she knew the outcome. She thought she had already won, but she didn't know me. Not really. Not the parts of me she had tried so hard to bury under years of ridicule and dismissal. Not the truths I had carried silently. Truths she prayed would never surface. Truths she had worked tirelessly to bury beneath her spotless reputation. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I let her see that I wasn't trembling anymore, that I wasn't shrinking into the chair she had tried to chain me to my whole life. My humiliation began to melt into something stronger, something sharper, something dangerous. It was then I realized this wasn't her victory. This was her mistake. I tightened my grip on the glass and drew a slow, steady breath. My voice hadn't yet found the air, but my decision was already made. I would not leave this table broken. Not this time. They thought they had silenced me forever, but silence is a fragile shield when the truth has been waiting for years to escape. I glanced at the faces around me, the uneasy relatives, the mother who wouldn't meet my eyes, the father who valued his pride over his child, and Emily, the sister whose mask was finally beginning to crack. A chill swept through me, not of fear, but of clarity. They were all about to hear the words they had never expected to pass my lips, and so I raised the glass a little higher, let the light reflect across its trembling surface, and allowed a bitter smile to cross my face. The entire table seemed to lean forward in anticipation, though no one moved. No one dared breathe. They thought I would stay quiet like always, but this time, I wasn't the only one with a secret. The sting of Emily's words lingered long after they were spoken, echoing in my mind as if they were carved into the very air I breathed. But her cruelty was not new. It was merely the latest in a long history of moments where she had been celebrated while I was diminished, cast as the perpetual misfit. I could still see the childhood dinners where her every story, every drawing, every achievement was met with applause and praise, while my efforts earned silence or criticism. The contrast was glaring, yet no one seemed to notice, except me. To the rest of the family, Emily was the golden child, the shining example of perfection, while I became the cautionary tale. And though I had long grown accustomed to being overshadowed, the weight of it had shaped me into something brittle, something both fragile and unbreakable. Richard, my father, carried sternness like armor, his presence cold enough to silence a room without raising his voice. He didn't need to scold me often. His eyes alone were enough to remind me of how far I had fallen short of his unspoken expectations. Discipline came not through words, but through disappointment, a force more crushing than punishment itself. My mother, Lydia, perfected denial to an art form, sweeping every conflict under the rug until the floorboards groaned beneath the weight of hidden resentments. And Emily, my sister, my rival, my tormentor, learned early how to weaponize charm. She cloaked her cruelty in laughter, disguising her barbs as playful teasing, her smirks as harmless jokes, each one sharp enough to leave me bleeding while everyone else chuckled along. I remembered vividly the first time I broke down as a teenager. I was 15, locked in my room after another day of being called dramatic and difficult. My chest heaved with sobs I couldn't explain, my thoughts spiraling into a darkness I didn't have the words for. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my mother how lost I felt, she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "You're just seeking attention, Madison," she said, her voice clipped and impatient. "Stop being so dramatic." Her words sliced deeper than any insult Emily had ever hurled. They told me, in no uncertain terms, that my pain was not real, that my struggles were inconvenient, that my suffering was nothing more than a performance for sympathy. And so, I learned to swallow it, to bury my feelings where no one could accuse me of making a scene. Meanwhile, Emily thrived under the spotlight. Every recital, every award, every milestone she achieved was met with beaming smiles and celebratory dinners. I still remember the night she was crowned homecoming queen. Our living room filled with flowers and laughter, her tiara glinting beneath the chandelier while I sat in the corner, invisible. Richard's arm draped proudly around her shoulders, Lydia fussing over every detail of her dress, as though the crown was theirs as much as it was hers. In that moment, I understood something painful and irreversible. My family didn't just prefer Emily, they needed her brilliance to hide their shadows, to prove to the world that we were flawless. And if that meant sacrificing me, erasing me, then so be it. The resentment grew quietly, like roots spreading unseen beneath the soil, twisting deeper with every dismissal and every insult. It wasn't just that Emily shined brighter, it was that she shined at my expense. Her victories became reminders of my inadequacy, her laughter an echo of my silence. And the more she rose, the more I felt myself sinking, tethered to an identity I hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. The problem child, the unstable one, the burden. Words never spoken outright, but implied in every sigh, every glance, every comparison. I became the family's scapegoat, the vessel for everything they didn't want to admit about themselves. And Emily, knowingly or not, thrived in the role of their savior. Looking back now, I can see how those years hardened me, how they etched into my bones the quiet rage that pulsed beneath my skin that Sunday at the table. I had been taught that speaking up was dangerous, that my voice carried only trouble. But in burying it, I had also buried parts of myself I didn't yet understand. Anger, grief, strength. The silence they demanded became a prison, but within that prison, something was growing, something they couldn't control. I didn't realize it then, but every cruel word, every dismissal, every stolen chance to be seen was shaping the person I would become. And on that Sunday afternoon, as Emily called me mentally ill for all to hear, I understood. The roots they had buried me under were now pushing me to rise. Even now, I can remember the countless nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing all the things I wanted to say but never could. How I wanted to tell Richard that his silence hurt worse than any punishment. How I wanted to scream at Lydia for pretending nothing was wrong while everything crumbled inside me. How I wanted to tell Emily that her teasing was cruelty dressed in lace, but I never did. I kept my secrets, my fears, my fury, tucked away where no one could dismiss them again. And so I waited, and I watched, and I carried the weight of those unspoken truths until my body trembled with the effort of holding them in. Now, sitting at that table with my glass in hand, I felt all those years rush back like a tidal wave. Every slight, every dismissal, every night spent begging for someone to see me, all of it lived in that moment. Emily thought she was reminding everyone of my weakness, but what she didn't understand was that she had given me the stage I had been denied my whole life. The spotlight she wielded so easily was suddenly mine to claim, and beneath the humiliation, beneath the shame, I felt something else rising, the certainty that the truth I carried would finally be heard. The table gleamed like a stage set, polished silver catching the light of the chandelier, every plate and glass meticulously aligned as though perfection itself had been laid out for display. Crystal bowls held vibrant salads, platters overflowed with roasted meats, and bottles of wine shimmered under the glow, carefully chosen to impress. Around me, the family leaned into their roles with practiced smiles, laughter placed neatly between bites, and voices pitched just right to signal harmony. Yet beneath the surface, I could feel it, the tension simmering, the way every word was weighed, every gesture choreographed. It was less a meal and more a performance, with Emily at its center, basking in the spotlight that had been hers for as long as I could remember. Emily's voice rose above the clinking of silverware, smooth and confident, as she recounted her latest promotion. Her words painted the picture of a woman who had mastered life, the perfect career, the respect of her peers, the bright future ahead. Each anecdote was tailored for admiration, each laugh perfectly timed to draw the family in. Richard's eyes sparkled with pride, Lydia's smile stretched almost painfully wide, and the relatives nodded as though hypnotized. I sat in silence, my fork scraping the edge of my plate, listening to the same old script play out. I had heard versions of it for years, only now the stakes felt higher, the performance more polished. And I, as always, was the contrast, the silent reminder of everything they wished to hide. Every so often, Emily's words curved back toward me, her concern dripping with a sweetness that was nothing but poison. "Of course, Madison's still finding her way," she said, her tone tinged with false pity. A cousin chuckled softly, glancing at me with thinly veiled curiosity, as though I were some oddity worth examining. My chest tightened, heat crawling up my neck, but I forced myself to keep my face composed. I had learned long ago that showing pain only gave her more power, that any reaction would be stored away to be used against me later. Still, each comment was another thread in the suffocating net, binding me in place, making it impossible to breathe. Richard, ever the patriarch, nodded approvingly at Emily's tales, his pride shining so blatantly it was almost blinding. I could see it in his posture, the straight back, the slight lean toward her, the rare softness in his expression. He had never looked at me that way. Lydia busied herself with refilling glasses, passing dishes, her smile never faltering, though I knew it was held together by sheer will. She lived for these moments, for the illusion that her family was flawless, that the cracks were merely shadows that could be brushed away. Her denial was her greatest weapon, one she wielded with precision. If she ignored the tension long enough, perhaps it would cease to exist. The relatives played along, eager to be part of the theater of perfection. They asked Emily about her projects, her travel plans, her polished life, each question feeding the machine of admiration. Their laughter filled the spaces between her words, and for a moment, I wondered if any of them noticed the strain beneath it all. Did they see the way my father's jaw tightened when silence fell? Did they sense the way my mother's hands trembled when no one was looking? Or was it easier for them, too, to pretend that everything was as perfect as the table before us? Pretending, after all, was safer than acknowledging the rot beneath the surface. For me, though, the performance was unbearable. Every smile, every toast, every compliment directed at Emily was another reminder of the mask I was expected to wear, but never fit. I could feel the suffocation pressing down on me, the familiar role of scapegoat settling on my shoulders like a shroud. No matter how still I sat, no matter how carefully I avoided conflict, I knew the eyes on me saw only one thing: the weak link, the unstable one, the shadow to Emily's light. And though I had grown used to the weight of their judgments, something in me rebelled against it that night. The air itself seemed too heavy, the silence between their words too sharp. Emily's smirk followed me across the table, her eyes glinting with the satisfaction of control. She knew the script better than anyone, and she relished my silence, my invisibility. To her, I was a prop, a necessary contrast to her perfection, proof of her superiority. And though no one else would dare admit it, I could see the enjoyment she drew from it. The way her voice sharpened when she spoke of me, her words always balanced between insult and pity. She wanted me diminished, erased, yet present enough to make her shine brighter. And I hated her for it, hated her with a fire I had kept buried for far too long. As I sat there, surrounded by clinking glasses and hollow laughter, I realized how rehearsed it all was, how trapped we all were in roles none of us had chosen, yet none dared abandon. Emily, the star; Richard, the stern but proud father; Lydia, the smiling denier; the relatives, the eager audience; and me, the scapegoat, the silent shadow, the reminder of imperfection in a family obsessed with its mask. But as Emily leaned back, basking in the glow of their admiration, I felt something stir inside me. The mask was slipping, for all of us, and when it finally shattered, none of them would be prepared for what lay beneath. My 20s felt like a battlefield, though no one in my family ever saw the wounds I carried from it. On the surface, I appeared to be functioning, working jobs that barely paid the bills, living in small apartments that smelled of someone else's cooking drifting through the walls. But inside, I was unraveling. The scars of my childhood, of being silenced and humiliated, had grown into something I couldn't contain anymore. When I finally sought therapy, trembling with both hope and shame, I thought perhaps this was the path to healing. Yet the moment my family found out, their reactions sliced deeper than any memory I had tried to bury. Emily was the first to twist it into a weapon. "She loves drama," she said at a family gathering, her voice carrying just enough for the room to hear. Therapy? Please, that's just Madison's way of avoiding responsibility. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to sting. Lydia scolded me afterward, accusing me of airing dirty laundry, as though acknowledging pain was a greater crime than enduring it. Richard, of course, said nothing. His silence was worse than words, a confirmation that I was once again on my own. Their refusal to see my struggle didn't erase it. It multiplied it, isolating me further. I remember nights spent sitting on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest, trying to quiet the storm in my head. I wanted so desperately to believe that healing was possible, that I wasn't destined to forever carry the weight of my family's disdain. But every attempt to open up was met with rejection. Every confession turned against me. I began to question whether I was broken beyond repair, whether Emily was right to call me unstable, whether perhaps my existence was nothing more than a mistake. Therapy became a secret sanctuary, the only place where my voice mattered, where my pain wasn't dismissed. Meanwhile, Emily's power over the family narrative only grew stronger. She painted herself as the perfect daughter, the career-driven success story, the woman who carried the family's pride on her shoulders. She spoke for us all in public, weaving a tapestry of accomplishments and happiness that bore no resemblance to reality. Cousins, neighbors, colleagues, everyone heard about Emily's triumphs, and if I came up at all, it was only in contrast, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. She had claimed the role of savior, while casting me as the perpetual failure, and the family applauded her performance, never questioning the cost. Richard reinforced this imbalance with his words, though often indirectly. At holiday dinners, he would toast to Emily's successes, recounting her promotions, her accolades, her shining reputation. His pride in her was palpable, his voice filled with warmth I had never known from him. But when it came to me, there was only silence, or at best, a vague remark about hoping I'd find stability soon. The absence of acknowledgement hurt more than open criticism. To be invisible to my own father was a wound that no applause for my sister could ever drown out. I longed for even a scrap of recognition, something that said I mattered, but it never came. Lydia, in her endless pursuit of appearances, enabled it all. She smiled through every gathering, her hands busy arranging dishes or smoothing wrinkles from tablecloths, determined that no one should see the cracks beneath the surface. "Families aren't perfect," she would say, as though perfection wasn't the very thing she worshipped. When I tried to share my truth, her eyes would harden, and she would whisper, "Don't ruin this for us, Madison." To her, my pain was not real. It was an inconvenience, a stain on the picture she wanted the world to admire. And so, I swallowed my words, burying them deeper, where they burned in silence. The loneliness of those years became unbearable, an ache that seeped into every part of me. Friends drifted away when they tired of my sadness, and relationships crumbled under the weight of my unspoken scars. I wanted to belong somewhere, to feel loved without condition, to be seen not as a problem, but as a person. Yet the louder Emily's success echoed in the family, the more my failures seemed amplified. I became a ghost at gatherings, present but unseen, my laughter hollow, my smile rehearsed. Inside, I screamed for someone to notice, to care, but the silence that followed was suffocating. Still, somewhere beneath the despair, a tiny ember of defiance remained. Each therapy session, each whispered admission of pain, was a step toward reclaiming my voice. Emily could control the family's narrative. Richard could ignore me. Lydia could silence me. But they couldn't take away the truths I carried inside. Those truths, though heavy, became my weapon, my hidden power. And though I didn't yet know when, I knew there would come a time when silence would no longer be an option. The scars they refused to see would one day speak for themselves, and when they did, the mask of perfection would finally crack. The air in the dining room thickened after Emily's words, so sharp and loud they seemed to slice through the clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation. "Mentally ill," she had said, her voice deliberately projected, a performance masked as concern, but laced with cruelty. I felt every pair of eyes turned toward me, some curious, some pitying, some, like our cousins, barely able to contain a smirk. The humiliation spread through my chest like fire, tightening around my ribs, threatening to consume me. Yet beneath the burn, something else flickered. Not shame, not despair, but anger. Anger that refused to die quietly this time. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, each beat louder than the forced laughter echoing around the table. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting to her plate, while my uncle cleared his throat as if to erase the tension. No one stood up for me. No one dared challenge Emily. That was the power she held, the authority of a golden child, untouchable and admired, her words accepted as truth. But as I gripped the stem of my glass, I realized how much I had enabled it by remaining silent for so many years. My silence had been her shield, and now it shattered. Emily smirked, satisfied with the ripple she had caused, her hand gracefully returning to her fork, as though nothing of consequence had been said. She basked in the uneasy chuckles, in the subtle reinforcement of her dominance. I studied her face, every carefully placed smile line, every flick of her hair, the same gestures that had fooled this family for decades. But behind her polished exterior, I saw the cracks, small, hidden fissures I had carried in my memory for years. Secrets, lies, truths no one dared speak aloud. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I let those truths loose into the open. My chest ached with the weight of years of suppression, every insult swallowed, every wound minimized, every plea dismissed. I could see Richard's stern face across the table, his jaw tight, his silence complicit as always. Lydia busied herself by pouring more wine into a cousin's glass, pretending not to hear the insult, as though ignoring it could erase it. The script was familiar. Emily attacks, the family watches, I shrink. Only this time, something inside me snapped. I would not play the scapegoat tonight. If they expected me to crumble under her words, They were wrong. My voice trembled at first, but it was mine. "I've had enough," I whispered, though the sound seemed to echo in my head, louder than it truly was. A hush fell across the table, the cousins freezing mid-bite, the laughter dissolving into uneasy silence. My hands shook, but I didn't let go of the glass I clutched, its cool surface grounding me. Emily raised an eyebrow, the corner of her lips curling as though she were amused by my attempt at defiance. She didn't know what was coming. None of them did. For once, I felt a strange calm begin to replace the panic, a sense of power building where fear had always lived. The tension swirled like smoke in the room, thick and inescapable. I glanced at the relatives, noticing their discomfort, their desperate wish for someone to divert the situation, to steer us back to laughter and small talk. But my entire life had been sacrificed for their comfort, their refusal to face truth. Why should I protect them now? Why should I stay silent so Emily could keep her crown polished and untarnished? The anger in me wasn't just for myself anymore. It was for every moment I had been erased, invalidated, crushed under their expectations. This time, the silence would not win. Emily leaned forward, her voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, here we go. Another one of Madison's episodes." The words were meant to silence me, to dismiss me before I could even speak. But her arrogance only fed my resolve. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to hold her gaze, refusing to look away as I had so many times before. My heart raced, yet I felt steady, anchored by something deeper than fear. She thought she knew how this would end, that I would retreat into myself, embarrassed and broken. But the truth was about to turn the entire table upside down. And then, with a clarity I had never felt before, I made the decision. This would be the night everything changed. No more swallowing words, no more protecting those who had hurt me. Emily's insult had ripped open the wounds, but it had also unlocked the vault of secrets I had carried alone for too long. My voice was ready, my courage rising like a tide that could no longer be pushed back. I lifted my glass slowly, its weight heavy but purposeful in my hand, and as every eye turned to me, I thought, they believed I was the fragile one. But tonight, I will be the one who breaks them. I raised my glass slowly, letting the motion stretch longer than it should, the crystal catching the light like a fragile weapon in my hand. All eyes were on me, even those who wished desperately not to look. The air felt brittle, charged, like a storm about to break. My voice, though unsteady at first, rose above the silence. "Emily," I said, my eyes locked on hers, "you've made a hobby out of calling me names, of reducing me to a diagnosis you barely understand. But maybe tonight, it's time everyone remembers the things you'd rather stay buried." The room seemed to tilt. Even the laughter from the younger cousins died away. Emily tilted her head, lips curved in a dismissive smirk, as though indulging a child in a tantrum. "Oh, Madison," she sighed, her tone dripping with mock pity. "You really don't want to embarrass yourself again." Her arrogance fueled me more than her insult. I kept my gaze fixed on her, refusing to let her diminish me with a glance. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the surge of power that came with finally speaking. I took another breath, steadying myself. "Do you remember the time you locked me in the basement when I was 9, just to prove I was too sensitive when I cried in the dark?" A ripple went through the table, quick but undeniable. Forks paused midair, eyes darted nervously, and someone cleared their throat to cut through the thickening silence. Emily gave a short laugh, one too sharp, too forced to sound natural. "You're exaggerating," she said quickly, though her smirk wavered. "You always had an imagination, but the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, they shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the memory, because some of them had seen me emerge that night, shaking and pale, only to be told it was my fault for crying. I could feel their unease pressing against my skin. I leaned forward slightly, voice gaining strength with each word. "Exaggerating? You pushed me down the stairs once when I was 13 because I wore your sweater. You told everyone I fell, and Mom backed you up, because God forbid the golden daughter admit a crack in her halo." Lydia's face stiffened, her glass frozen midair, refusing to meet my gaze. Richard stared at his plate, as if silence could make him invisible. Emily opened her mouth to cut me off, but I didn't give her the chance. And every time I tried to speak, you laughed and called me unstable, while everyone here nodded and looked away. The smirk on Emily's face faltered, a shadow passing quickly over her eyes before she blinked it away. "You're twisting stories," she said sharply, her tone losing its false sweetness. "You always want to be the victim." Her voice carried less certainty now, though. I saw the subtle flinch in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around her wine glass. The room wasn't on her side this time. Not fully. The silence of the family had always been her shield, but I had cracked it with each truth, each memory pulled out from the dark and placed under the light. Around the table, the discomfort grew palpable. My aunt shifted in her chair, muttering something about not bringing up the past, while one of the cousins looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the potatoes. No one defended me, but no one defended her either. That absence of loyalty unsettled Emily, and I saw it. For the first time, she wasn't basking in the applause of her carefully constructed image. She was on the defensive. I let the silence drag, forcing them all to sit with the truth, forcing Emily to feel what it was like to be the one under the microscope. Every insult, every humiliation, I continued, my voice lower now but sharper, like glass cutting through the tension. You threw at me because you needed someone to carry what you couldn't face in yourself, and I carried it, Emily. For years I carried your cruelty while you shined at school, while you bragged at family dinners, while everyone praised your perfection. But perfection is a mask, and tonight, it's slipping. I set my glass down firmly, the sound loud in the quiet room. Emily's smile faltered again, her eyes narrowing, though the flicker of fear betrayed her poise. She forced a laugh, high-pitched and hollow. "You're just making things up for attention," she said, but her words were brittle, cracking at the edges. The family still avoided my eyes, but their silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of agreement anymore. It was the silence of doubt, of suspicion, of knowing there might be more truth in my words than they had ever allowed themselves to believe. And in that silence, I found my strength hardening. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Emily thought this was the worst I had to give, but I had only just begun. The silence lingered like smoke after a fire, choking the air with everything left unsaid. I could feel the weight of their eyes, some darting away quickly, others fixed on me with a mixture of shock and unease. Emily tried to reclaim the room with a laugh, sharp and deliberate, as if she could sweep my words away with the sound. "She's always been dramatic," she told the table, waving her hand like a queen dismissing a peasant. But the laughter didn't echo this time. It fell flat, hanging awkwardly before dissolving into quiet. That was when I knew. I had found the crack in her mask. I leaned back in my chair, letting the tension build around me, choosing my words carefully. "Dramatic?" I repeated, my tone even, almost calm. Or maybe just honest in a family that has built its reputation on lies. The word struck harder than I intended, because I saw Lydia stiffen at the word lies, her fork clattering softly against her plate. Emily's smirk wavered again, her lips twitching as if holding back a retort she couldn't quite deliver. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't weeping. I was speaking with the steady rhythm of someone who had finally chosen to stop hiding, and they couldn't look away. Richard, however, snapped. He slammed his palm against the table, the sound sharp enough to make one of the cousins jump. "Enough," he barked, his voice laced with authority. "You're humiliating this family with your nonsense." His eyes drilled into me, cold and punishing, the way they had when I was a child daring to answer back. The familiar sting of being silenced flared in my chest, but this time, I noticed something different. Across the table, Michael, my uncle who had said so little all evening, watched me with eyes that didn't look angry. They looked tired, but sympathetic. That tiny flicker of recognition from Michael gave me the courage to keep going. I met Richard's glare and didn't flinch. "Humiliation?" I said quietly, though my voice carried. "The humiliation comes from decades of pretending, from ignoring every bruise, every tear, every manipulation Emily used to get what she wanted. You call it nonsense, but you know it's true." My words made the room shift again. A few heads turned toward Emily, searching her face for denial or reassurance. But her mask had begun to fracture. She wasn't smiling now. She was grinding her teeth, her composure slipping. Emily straightened her posture, her tone turning icy. "You're just jealous. That's what this is about. You've always been bitter because I succeeded where you failed." Her words cut sharp, but they rang hollow, like a rehearsed script delivered without conviction. I tilted my head, letting a small, humorless smile curl on my lips. "Succeeded?" I asked softly. "By stepping on everyone else? By spinning lies until even you can't tell the truth anymore?" The room seemed to hold its breath, for once. I wasn't the one on trial. She was. The more I spoke, the more I noticed her unraveling. Emily's hands fidgeted with her napkin, twisting it tighter until it nearly tore. Her laughter, when it came, was short and brittle, lacking the effortless dominance it usually carried. Lydia tried to intervene, muttering something about keeping peace, but her voice trembled, betraying her own discomfort. The image of perfection, of Emily as the golden daughter, of this family as a flawless portrait, was slipping out of their grasp. And once the mask cracks, no matter how hard you press it back together, the pieces never fit the same way again. I pressed on, each word deliberate. Do you remember how you convinced Aunt Clara to lend you money for college by swearing you'd pay her back in a year? That was 12 years ago, Emily. She never saw a cent. A sharp intake of breath came from the corner of the table where Clara sat, her hands frozen around her fork. Her face flushed red, and though she said nothing, the truth of it was written all over her. Emily opened her mouth to object, but no words came out. That silence, louder than any denial, cracked her mask further than I ever could have imagined. In that moment, I realized the tide was shifting. For years, Emily had commanded the room with her voice, her confidence, her carefully cultivated story. Tonight, though, her control slipped with each word I spoke, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of those who had always believed her. The fear in her gaze wasn't just about me. It was about losing the empire she had built on lies. And as I looked around the table, I felt it. The perfect family portrait was crumbling, piece by piece, right in front of us. The words hovered in my throat like a storm waiting to break, and I knew the moment I let them out, there would be no turning back. My hand gripped the glass tighter, cool condensation pressing against my skin, grounding me for what I was about to do. Around me, the clinking of silverware had ceased entirely, the air so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. Emily's stare cut through me like a blade, daring me to stop, daring me to shrink back into the silence I'd lived in for years. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. I raised my voice just enough, steady and sharp. You want to talk about who's sick, Emily? Then let's finally talk about the secret you've buried for 15 years. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, quick intakes of breath, the sudden scrape of forks against porcelain. One of the cousins nearly dropped her wine glass, the sound of it clattering against the table breaking the heavy quiet. Emily's face drained of color, her lips parting in a trembling line. For once, she couldn't hide behind her laugh or her practiced superiority. She tried to speak, but no sound came out, just a shallow inhale that made her chest rise and fall too quickly. All the little whispers, all the things I had carried in silence for so long, were about to come roaring into the open. I leaned forward, my voice unflinching. 15 years ago, when everyone thought you were away at that summer program for advanced students, you weren't. You were in a clinic 2 towns over, a clinic for girls who had gotten pregnant too young. I let the words settle, heavy and undeniable. Lydia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Richard stiffened, his jaw locking so tightly I could hear the faint grind of his teeth. Around the table, relatives exchanged looks of shock and disbelief, the illusion of Emily's perfection unraveling faster than even I had imagined. Emily's fingers trembled as she clutched her napkin, twisting it like a lifeline, her face so pale it looked almost translucent. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice cracked, betraying her. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not only did you hide it, Emily, you made me the villain so no one would ever suspect you. Every time you called me unstable, every time you laughed at me in front of others, it was to keep eyes off you. You built your entire reputation on burying me while you covered your shame. The words came out raw, shaking, but they cut deeper than any scream ever could. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear someone's fork hit the floor, the sharp clink echoing like a bell tolling the death of something sacred. Clara's face was pale as parchment. She looked like she might faint. Michael stared at Emily with a mixture of pity and disappointment, his hand rubbing against his jaw slowly, as though he had long suspected something wasn't right. No one laughed this time. No one dismissed me. For the first time in years, the balance of power at this table had shifted, and Emily knew it. I saw her try to rally, opening her mouth as if to conjure up another dismissive quip, but nothing came. Her throat bobbed, her eyes darted wildly across the table, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But Lydia was frozen, her face wet with silent tears. Richard's knuckles were white against the table edge, fury and humiliation battling for dominance in his expression. The cousins who had always snickered at Emily's cruelty now stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. The golden daughter, the flawless achiever, the untouchable star, suddenly small, suddenly cornered. I leaned back, my voice quieter now, almost tender, but firm enough to strike. You thought the only way to stay untouchable was to make me disposable. You sacrificed me to protect your secret, and you never stopped. Every insult, every whisper about me being unstable, it was all just a shield for you. But shields crack, Emily, and tonight, yours has shattered. My chest heaved with the force of my words, my heart pounding, but instead of fear, I felt liberation. For once, the truth wasn't my burden alone. It belonged to all of us now. The table had become a battlefield of silence, each family member trapped in the rubble of what they thought they knew. Emily couldn't look at me, couldn't look at anyone. She stared down at her lap as if the truth might disappear if she refused to meet it. But it was too late. The mask was gone, the empire of lies collapsing in real time. And as I sat there, trembling but unbroken, I realized something I had never dared believe before. I was no longer the weak one. I was the one who had finally spoken the truth. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, as the air thickened with whispers and sharp gasps. I could hear forks tapping nervously against plates, the cousins shifting in their chairs, the quiet hum of disbelief vibrating like tension in a wire. Richard's face was rigid, jaw tight, eyes darting as though he could erase the truth by sheer will. Lydia's hands shook, fingers trembling over her wineglass, her lips pressed together so tightly it looked like she might snap at any moment. Emily sat frozen, pale as marble, her icy composure crumbling like a fragile sculpture. For a moment, it felt as if the world itself had stopped, waiting for someone to say something, anything, to break the suffocating silence. Madison, Richard's voice cracked, low and unsteady, betraying the denial he was desperately trying to hold on to. This can't be true. He gestured vaguely toward Emily, as if trying to shield her from the accusation, as though the facts themselves could be deflected by his authority. But the room no longer bent to his will. Cousins whispered to each other, exchanging shocked glances, while aunts and uncles shifted uncomfortably, unable to maintain the illusion of harmony. Even Michael's calm presence was now a beacon, steady in contrast to the chaos surrounding him, and his gaze met mine with a quiet affirmation that fueled my courage. Emily's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, as the first tremors of panic reached her. Her lips quivered as she tried to form words, but none came out coherent. A hollow laugh escaped, brittle and raw, a poor shield against the storm of judgment pressing down on her. She had built her life on the careful orchestration of perception, yet nothing she had rehearsed could withstand this sudden exposure. I watched her, a mixture of pity and triumph surging through me. For once, she was vulnerable, unmasked, and I no longer had to shrink in her shadow. Lydia's tears fell freely now, her stoic denial dissolving into helpless emotion. She had spent decades controlling appearances, denying truth to preserve a flawless image, and now the house she built with lies trembled beneath her. Richard's silence grew heavier, no longer confident, no longer protective. Even the cousins who had always followed Emily's lead were unsettled, some whispering that perhaps they had been wrong about me, that maybe the golden child had not been so perfect after all. The balance had shifted, and the room was unsteady under the weight of revelation. Then Michael spoke, and the room fell still, hanging on his voice like a lifeline. "She's telling the truth," he said plainly, his eyes calm, yet unwavering. "I've known about this for years. Madison has carried more than anyone should ever have to carry. Emily's lies, they're finally exposed." His words struck the table with quiet authority, and for the first time, I felt a wave of relief pass through me. The burden I had borne alone was now acknowledged, validated, witnessed. The oppressive shadow of secrecy began to lift, leaving me lighter, though the tension around me had only deepened. Emily's face twisted, panic flaring as she tried to regain control. "That's a lie! Michael, how could you say that?" she screamed, voice shaking, eyes wide with fear. But no one echoed her plea. The relatives who had always deferred to her judgment looked at her now with uncertainty, some even glancing toward me as if searching for answers. She had relied on fear, manipulation, and the family's silence for years, and now that foundation had cracked. I could see it in her trembling hands, her faltering stance, the hollowing of her usual smirk. Her empire was unraveling. Lydia finally whispered, almost to herself, "All these years, we didn't see." Her voice broke under the weight of regret, realization, and disbelief. Richard sat frozen, unable to speak, his denial eroding into helplessness. Michael's steady gaze never left mine, and I realized how much his quiet acknowledgement had given me strength. Even among the confusion, the anger, and the shock, I felt a small sense of vindication. The lies had been pulled into the light, and for the first time in my life, the truth had allies. The aftershock continued to ripple through the room. Emily remained cornered, trembling, unable to defend herself with the ice-cold composure that had always protected her. I took a deep breath, heart still pounding, feeling the strange mix of fear and exhilaration that came from speaking truth to power. Around the table, my family was no longer united under the illusion of perfection. The fractures had appeared, the cracks widened by the revelation. And as I looked at Emily, at Lydia, at Richard, at the relatives who had once ignored my suffering, I felt it with certainty. Nothing would ever be the same. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye on me, yet for the first time in decades, their judgment didn't crush me. My legs shook, but not with fear, only with the adrenaline of finally breaking free from a lifetime of silence. Emily's gaze followed me, hollow and haunted, and I knew in that moment she understood that nothing would restore the control she had wielded for so long. The room remained frozen, the aftershock of truths too heavy to be ignored. Forks lay abandoned, glasses untouched, while whispered conversations tried and failed to fill the void I had left behind. Richard's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, denial, regret, and shock mingling in the set of his jaw. Lydia sat still, hands clenching her napkin, as if it could stitch the frayed edges of the family back together. Michael's eyes met mine once more, a small, reassuring nod that reminded me I wasn't alone. The rest of the relatives lingered uneasily, caught between awe and disbelief, powerless to restore the facade that had crumbled. And Emily, she slumped in her chair, her pride shattered, her carefully constructed image broken, her empire of lies reduced to ash in the quiet aftermath of truth. I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, a trembling exhilaration that coursed through me like electricity. Every insult, every humiliation, every year of dismissal had led to this moment, and I realized I no longer needed anyone's approval to exist fully, authentically, without fear. The room had once been a cage, but now it was a stage on which the truth had performed its final act. I had stepped out of the shadows, out of the fear, and I would not return. My voice, my courage, and my life were mine alone. As I moved toward the door, I could hear Emily's shallow, uneven breathing, the tremor in her hands betraying her terror. Her gaze followed me, but it was no longer commanding. It was pleading and hollow. The golden child, untouchable for so long, had finally been exposed, and the weight of her own secrets had left her immobile, broken in a way I had never been. My heart clenched briefly with the knowledge of what I had taken from her, not out of revenge, but as an inevitable consequence of the truth. She had chosen to build herself on my silence, and now she would pay its price. The cool air of the night greeted me like a long-lost friend as I stepped out of the house. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp breeze fill my lungs, carrying away the tension, the fear, and the years of restraint. The sounds of the evening, cars passing, leaves rustling, were oddly soothing, reminders that life continued beyond the walls of that fractured family. For the first time, I felt the fullness of freedom, a trembling joy that came not from defiance alone, but from knowing I had claimed my own truth and refused to be silenced. I glanced back once, the warm glow of the dining room light spilling onto the porch, illuminating Emily's form slumped in her chair. She looked small, diminished, and finally mortal, in a way she had never been allowed to feel. The family, fractured and uneasy, would never forget this night, yet their whispers, their shame, and their disarray could no longer touch me. I carried nothing but the memory of my courage and the knowledge that I had finally spoken what had been silenced for far too long. Step by step, I walked down the sidewalk, the cool breeze tangling in my hair, my heart trembling but unafraid. I realized that the world outside these walls was vast, full of possibility, and free of the judgment that had once defined me. Each step was a reclamation, a deliberate movement away from fear, toward life, toward the self I had been too afraid to embrace. For the first time, I understood that liberation wasn't about defeating them. It was about choosing myself. I paused at the end of the driveway, looking up at the stars scattered across the night sky, and whispered to myself, a quiet declaration that felt as immense as the universe above. They wanted me silent forever. But it was Emily who would never recover from the silence that followed, and with that, I stepped fully into the night, heart trembling, body free, soul unbound, finally at peace.